Welcome to this next episode of Coffee with Sales Engineers. I've got my coffee. Jonathan, you have your coffee?
I got water.
All right.
The cold brew this morning.
All right. Love it. We can do water with sales engineers. So excited to have you on this podcast. Thank you so much. Why don't you give a quick intro about yourself, and then we'll dive into our questions.
Sure. Yeah. So name is Jonathan Malkin. I've been in the SE role for 10 years or so, maybe even a couple of years before that. And I've been in technology for over 20 years. So starting out back in the day, technical degree, doing programming, testing. I eventually found a niche with business analysis, like actually going in, mapping out processes, and then mapping that into a model or a design for custom software. And that sort of made its way into professional services to implement software and actually go out on client sites to figure out how they can use it, and training being a part of that as well. And eventually, after 10 years of that, getting into the SE role, where I've been for some time now. Along the way, I've held a variety of individual contributor, managed teams, even the director of operations to help scale up what we've done here at Automation Anywhere over the last 7 years. So I have a variety of things to draw on there.
You've done it all. You've done it all, man. All kinds of roles. Very exciting. And I remember,
Right.
I don't know if you remember, Jonathan, our relationship started way back when we were both trying to figure out how to launch and create SC community in Austin. Since then, there's been PSC and all these online communities, but way back in those days, there were just few of us, and we were trying to get some SCs together to meet up for coffee, lunch, drinks, and just talk sales engineering. So here we are, many years later.
That was certainly fun.
It's
really fun to do that. I started from scratch on that. I met with some SEs and managers to see what they thought locally, especially here in Austin with yourself and others. Even met with a guy who had tried to get an organization going some years ago,
right?
But had to wait for the right time when there were, I think, enough SEs and enough awareness of the profession to get something going. And I reached out to like thousands of people locally to get that meetup going. We eventually had speakers. I even spoke at some of them, and we're getting like 50 plus people to come out to events. So it was a good time.
You're the founder of the Austin SC meetup, right?
Yeah. And then I passed the torch over to PSC once they more formalized like a national or international organization.
Amazing. So you've been an advocate for sales engineering for a very long time. Jonathan, tell us, how did you fall into it? Did you just wake up and say, I want to do sales engineering, or how did this magic happen?
Like a lot of folks, I didn't know it existed. Nobody told me about such a position in school or any of my jobs until I actually met an SE.
Yeah.
That's the only way I found out about it. People have been doing this job for a long time. Like, you can even see movies about the early Silicon Valley days of those early defense contractors getting started out there, and having a technical guy that they pulled from somewhere to go on a sales call with them. That was the role. But it wasn't formalized or any particular skill set. They're like, we just need a technical guy to talk about technical things if something comes up. I was well into my career where I was working for a services partner after working for the software vendor SuccessFactors for a few years. I then worked with one of the consulting partners, and they had another guy there named Jonathan who was working as the SE. Pretty much every proposal was an RFP for that company. His primary responsibility, he did some demos, certainly, but largely it was preparing these RFP responses. And we prepared very extensive responses, which oftentimes is why we got contracts, because we would prepare entire designs and solutions and present like everything. And competitors, sometimes very large companies, proposing or putting proposals in, they would just answer the questions, right? And copy paste materials from other proposals. And we were actually putting full out solution documents together for what they could do. So that was my early exposure, was saying, oh, that looks pretty neat, mentioning that to a couple of people. And then the CEO of the services company said, hey, would you like to do this? And flew me up to Montreal to meet with him and Jonathan. It's Montreal, so we went out to lunch and had a couple glasses of wine, which is acceptable there. And we got into it, and it was great. So I worked with them for a few years, mainly doing RFPs and some demos here and there.
Nice. So it was just two Jonathans was the SE team. Or
That's
were there
right.
Okay.
Yeah, and it was a consulting company that had maybe, I don't know, on the order of 30, maybe 50 consultants, somewhere in that ballpark, under 100 people kind of thing. Everybody was like a pretty high-powered consulting person, really putting in the hours. Like it was really like an accounting or a law firm or something, like very professionalized services, very organized and
Nice.
very good people that they had there. Yeah.
That's awesome. You started your SE career through the RFP lens. Most SEs hate RFPs. So that didn't scare you away. That actually inspired you to go into the profession because of how thorough, I guess it was the solutioning element of it. If your company was just doing what the competitors were doing, which was let's slap some generic answers to these generic questions and send them out, see if we get to the next meeting or not. Whereas your company was looking at each question and using that as an opportunity to say, how can we tailor the solution for them? And it sounds like that part of figuring out the solution, documenting it, presenting it, even though you probably hadn't talked to these people yet, was what was exciting to you?
Yeah, there were some aspects that I really liked. The storytelling, communication, putting together some kind of solution for a client that would work for them. Oftentimes we hadn't had too many conversations with the client. Like sometimes in the RFP process, you're not even allowed to talk to
Right.
them. They just send you a document and you have to respond. We had some where we'd meet with the client for informational meetings before they'd ever send out an RFP. So that's part
Right.
of that game is if you can meet with somebody before they initiate the RFP process, then you're not subject to the rules yet. So you can try to steer them towards doing certain things or wanting certain things that you're better equipped
Right.
to deliver
Your
than a
engagement.
competitor. So you try to steer it a little bit. You're at the whims of however they put it together. I was learning all the time. We had a pretty wide portfolio of products to draw on. It was essentially everything HR. So every different HR function has its own product module that we delivered. And so there's constant learning. And that was an aspect that appealed. And then, of course, the compensation in pre-sales. That was also rather attractive. It was a step up from the regular consulting salary that I had been doing.
Yeah, makes sense. That's exciting. And that happened a while back. And it sounds since then you've held multiple roles, but for most part, you're continuing an amazing, successful sales engineering career. What keeps you going? Hasn't it gotten boring and same thing over and over again? What keeps you going as a sales engineer?
Things have changed every couple of years here for me. So I've held like 3 or 4 completely different roles. I started out as the second SE in the US. There were like 5 or 6 SEs around globally. So we had a couple of people in India, a guy in Australia, so forth. And at the time, we didn't even have a structured process. The one SE prior to my arrival was just flying somewhere every week and spending 5 days a week in a different city with a different
Wow.
client. Very inefficient, only able to service 4 clients a month, right?
Right.
And a lot of that time was wasted because we would need infrastructure provisioned. So it wouldn't be. So we'd show up, they'd have to do an emergency request. And then it might be Wednesday by the time you actually start building something, right?
Right.
That was our first order of business, was like actually putting a structured process in place. Once we had defined one, we got together with the head of sales and said, here's all the tasks that are involved in a POC, and here's what can be done remotely, what can be done on site, standard materials that we could reuse, makes it easier, presentations that we could reuse that said, hey, here's what we're going to do. So that was like the first 18 months that I was with the company. And then they started scaling out. I started managing a team of SEs, mentoring and coaching folks that have been doing what I was doing.
Mhm.
6 months into that, we got all of the managers together in Austin. So we had 4 or 5 managers at that point, each with teams. So we'd really scaled out. We'd gone from 2 people in the US to like 24 people, 18 to 24 months into my time. We all got together and divvied up the work and figured out how we should manage the operations, and figured out that it was going to take 3 people working full time to do the operational work. And so I took that role on, and that ended up being a global role, building out demo systems, training materials, reports for management and the executives, and everything else that goes in
Yeah.
that's not directly client facing. So that was
Yeah.
3 people to help scale that out globally. And then in the last couple of years, I've come back to being an SE and now work on the healthcare team, specifically in the healthcare industry.
Nice. I can have a whole coffee discussion with you about that operations, because I feel like obviously well established, mature SE organizations have demo engineers,
Mhm.
SC enablement, operations, but in a lot of smaller teams, it's every SE's fifth or sixth job
Yeah.
that they do poorly and doesn't get done. So having a centralized global resource who has expertise in that can be amazing. That's great. So you've got different flavors of sales engineering, management, and it sounds like that's what's kept you going. Are there specific things when you look back at your sales engineering career? Are there specific things that have been fulfilling to you personally to say, I'm happy doing what I'm doing. I'm making a difference. There's no reason for me to look at product management or go be a sales rep or do something else.
Yeah. I think some of that's changing, but I would say over my history, certainly the operations role stands out. I got to do leadership, so I had people working for me, and I got to be a leader in multiple ways. So there were people directly reporting to me, but then also I was an influencer and a thought leader doing things for everybody globally and even across departments. So part of my responsibility was talking to marketing and sales and product and customer support to establish processes between the departments. How are we going to get customer feedback into product requirements, like all that stuff? Many meetings and many drafts of how to do those things. That certainly was very fulfilling, being able to scale out the org and have all of those components as part of my job, and be able to get those things in place and go from, like, when I started with the company where they didn't even have a standard process for anything, to several years later actually having reusable demo systems and reporting and training materials. We're onboarding 250 people in 18 months, basically.
Wow.
And we put all the onboarding in place and the training and all that stuff. And I look at what we have today, and it's incredible. People still complain there's never enough. There's always more scenarios or new products that don't have a fleshed out message quite yet. But compared to where we were, it's drastically different. And so being
It
able to
must
put all
be,
that stuff in place feels pretty good.
yeah, it must be fulfilling to be able to see the machine humming, right? And machine that
Yeah.
you helped build from the ground up. That's amazing. Looking back, and to remind me, Jonathan, you've always worked in sales, or were there any sales engineering jobs that you did that were outside of a sales department? Were you doing sales engineering post sales or
Mm.
partner sales or anything like that, or just been primarily in the pre-sale side?
Yeah, so at the consulting company, structured a little bit differently. We had 2 SEs for consulting company, and we reported directly to the CEO, and you
Yeah,
could say he was the CRO too. He was like the
right.
head of sales. So that was like being in the sales org. We work closely with the sales team. Here at Automation Anywhere, we report into the CRO, so parallel to the rest of the sales organization, but the CRO is the head of sales, reporting into there. At one time, I reported, when it was just me and another guy, we reported directly to the head of sales. Always part of the sales org, but my customer base has largely been existing customers. We have a land and expand strategy, completely different from the RFP stuff I was doing, where that was mostly new prospects at the
Right.
time. Land and expand here, maybe we sell a 50 to 100K deal initially, sometimes a huge ELA type of deal right out of the gate,
Yeah.
but typically a smaller deal. And then it's cross-sell, upsell in the next 1 to 3 years to get to a very significant place. So a lot of what I do is like nurturing existing clients and getting them to a point where they're able to scale. So it's always been part of the sales org. One of the things I'd actually like to see in my career is stepping into a greater role, and I think the industry is headed this way, of like a more general solutions role,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because calling what I do today even to be pre-sales, like before
Right.
the
You're
sale,
not free,
doesn't even
exactly.
make sense,
It doesn't make
right?
sense. Yeah. Yeah. Because
So
you're selling to customers. So that's
yeah,
not fully pre-sales.
yeah, most of my job is existing large clients that
Right.
they're spending plenty of money, right? And we're
Yeah.
trying to get them to spend more.
Sell, cross sell, But
Yeah,
for predominantly that sales relationship, I think what I would love for the audience to hear, which I've always believed is so core to our profession, which is this interesting dynamic between an AE and an SE, right?
mhm,
The Batman Robin, all kinds of analogies on what that pairing is. And it's rarely one to one, right?
yeah,
Enterprise is one to one, but in most cases, SEs are shared between multiple account executives. I'm curious if you have thoughts on what's special about that relationship. What's been your experience working with AEs?
yeah.
What's special about that relationship? And also, if you've got any stories, any use cases around some AE behavior or things that AEs have done that really stick out for you as an SE.
Sure. I mean, we've operated i- with different models of alignment, particularly at this company. At the consulting company, like it was me and the other guy and whoever was in sales. So, and then here, as the company scaled, we tried a variety of things. So there was a period of time where we had pods covering like a region or a whole segment of account executives, but no direct alignments. A
Or
per
round robin.
POC,
Yeah,
yeah, on a
whoever's
per
best.
POC basis, we'd find who has availability, more
Right.
like the consulting model post sales
Right.
of assigning people to do services. It was more like that. So early on, it was more in that vein. Over time, we went much more to being directly aligned to either two or now three account executives directly, right? So whatever those two or three people need, we cover everything. If somebody's out, then we cover their accounts too, right? I got
Right.
another guy on the healthcare team. If he's on vacation, I cover his folks. Fine. It is interesting working with different account executives, wide variety of styles and personalities,
Yeah.
different ways that they work. I have a tough time predicting who's going to get the revenue numbers. Sometimes it seems like luck of the draw on clients. Some folks get a client that's ready to spend a lot and has a very definitive deadline that they have to get things done by.
Yeah.
So they're going to close. Some folks just have clients that or prospects that won't say yes or no, right? They just drag on forever
Right.
in the hope that maybe they'll close. Definitely a range of approaches. I've seen very consultative AEs, right? I had one who put in tons of hours, would develop like extensive organizational diagrams of people he knows at the client and solution designs that he even did himself, more from like a business process type standpoint than a technical standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
He was bringing in other companies as technology partners to do larger solutions so that he could be seen as a more extensive consulting person, like actual thought leader going into a company. I've seen that approach. I've also seen folks that just nurture accounts or chase down things as they can. And the end results don't seem to map directly to either approach.
Yeah.
Certainly the
I
approach
guess
that's necessary.
yeah, I was gonna say, but as an SE, you have to have that superpower to be chameleon and adopt, right? You're not necessarily asking each three of them to say, hey, I like person A's approach, so B and C, change your style to match with A. You have to find a way, and that's your superpower, to be able to, when you're with A, you follow along with that approach,
Yeah,
support them in whatever capacity they need. But you're right, like every sales rep is unique and they have their different styles, but sales engineers have to adopt to that, right?
I've been around long enough that I've been able to request who I would rather work with, right?
Yeah.
So folks that I get along better with, whose style works a little better for me, and say, hey, I think we'd work better together, that sort of thing. So you can figure that out, align appropriately.
What are some qualities come to mind when you think about those better reps? Are there qualities that jump at you that say, you know what, these are the things they do that make them best for SEs?
Yeah, I used to look at things like how well they utilize SEs.
Hmm.
Do they use us where we can help? And do they not ask us to do things that won't help? If there's going to be a prospecting call and there's nobody technical on the line and we have no idea if the client's even in the realm of what we do, I don't need to be on that call. So that's one of the ways I evaluate it is how well they utilize SEs, certainly,
Okay.
because then I can make the most of my time, right? And then also in the past, I've also looked at who's been like technically interesting. So like the approach I mentioned of being more consultative and like coming up with solutions and stuff was
Mhm.
always very interesting to me because I could actually learn things from the account executive. I don't think I lean into that as much anymore. The account reps that I've seen make more progress in deals do tend to focus highly on specific solutions. I've seen that be a differentiator,
Okay.
especially with what I sell now, which is
Right.
a platform with a number of products that are used to build automations, right? So you don't
Right.
directly use our platform, you enable a team, either a part of service partners or the client usually has their own team over time that they develop. And so figuring out an actual specific use case is key because we
Yeah.
have a general platform that we can automate pretty much anything, right?
The reps that have the domain expertise or
Yeah,
that consultative strength can be specific and as a result can optimize where you add value the best, right?
right.
Because I think the examples you were giving earlier where some junior reps can be, look, I know my SC is technical. I'm having this prospect conversation. I don't know if somebody's going to ask any questions, but hey, Jonathan, why don't you join the call anyway,
Yeah,
just in case somebody asks a question, right? An hour later, you're looking at your clock going, I'm totally wasting my time here, right?
yeah,
Versus the rep that's more thoughtful, that's more process oriented, that has domain expertise to know that if your time would be valuable in this meeting or not. No, I love that. And it is, and at least in my experience, right? You look across the sales team, usually the top performers are best liked by SCs because they are optimizing their SC resource effectively
right. Yeah.
to win, right? And the ones that are abusing SC resources and other resources, they may be abusing SDR resources. They're the ones that usually struggle, even though they feel like they're enlisting everybody, but they're
Hmm.
enlisting everybody inefficiently and they
Right.
don't perform. So it really is optimizing that relationship.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that leadership too, where the AEs have to organize a team, right? That's a lot of what they do as well. Like specifically for the healthcare team that I'm on, we have both technical experts like myself with some industry expertise and industry experts with limited technical expertise. There's some crossover, but we have a doctor who worked as a doctor for years and then went
Right.
on the technology side of medicine, who consults in various ways, white papers, conferences, like he's got special contacts he draws on, those kinds of things. We've got like a medical billing expert who comes in, can talk the language with those folks on those use cases. So being able to organize those different resources to speak with the client at the right times and do the right activities, not to mention bringing in the deal desk or legal and all the other parties that have to be involved to
Yeah.
get things done. That's definitely critical. I think that point there I just brought up is pretty key for anybody thinking about being an SE.
Yeah. That was going to be my next question.
Yeah. So I think there's multiple ways into the profession. Loosely, I would think of it as either coming in from a technical angle of being an expert in the technology, or an industry expert or a functional expert. It could be you could be hiring somebody from your customer, right? In some cases, you may be directly hiring somebody that you work with on the customer side, or people who could be a customer, right? Maybe from companies you're not prospecting. I've seen both those approaches. It partly depends on the technical complexity of your product, right? So where I'm at now, there's a lot of technical complexity. So we're going to need technical experts on the SE team.
Mhm.
But then for particular industries like healthcare and finance or BFSI, it does help to have industry experts, right? So like our healthcare team has a couple of folks that are specifically industry experts. I've seen at other companies where I've talked to the leaders for say like at Sprinkler, when I talk with them, they came and spoke at our meetup back in the day. And they talked about how they would typically hire folks out of marketing departments at other companies and then teach them the software, right? The software didn't have a lot of technical complexity. Maybe it
Right.
would integrate with a few other systems. That's always the case, but that was pretty limited, right? And then using the software was pretty straightforward. So if you're
Right.
selling productivity software, marketing, sales, applications, that kind of thing that aren't extensive technically, certainly you want folks that come directly out of that function or industry who can just talk about the business with those folks and say, hey, I used to do what you were doing, and here's why I would use what we're doing.
It's so much
You know,
easier for them to build that credibility, right? If you can
yeah,
speak to the prospect to say, I was in your shoes before joining this
yeah,
company. I've used the product, right?
yep,
So you build that instant credibility and trust.
yeah. Yeah, and then for my part, being more of a technical expert, building some of that industry expertise over time, it's similar in some sense because I end up talking to the technical contacts of the customer, right? And we have a highly technical product that brings in the IT department. So I'm also, in a sense, speaking with my colleagues in IT and technical functions. So you really do have to match like who you're talking to, the SEs that are coming in.
So
One thing
maybe
I've been,
those people that are wanting to get into sales engineering, right? You may not have to have sales engineering experience, but if you've got the domain expertise, right? If you're already working for a healthcare hospital, but
Mhm.
you've got the intellectual curiosity, and you should consider sales engineering as a career, because if you end up at a company like Automation Anywhere and you're in the healthcare department, you can learn sales engineering. But what you bring to the table is that domain expertise, is that context, is that industry knowledge that could be very valuable.
Yeah, we end up having both needs. And it makes me think too of a company we competed with that is struggling at the moment. They drastically downsized. But if you're doing healthcare automation, you have a strong need in both industry expertise and technical expertise. So you really have to hire both.
Yeah.
And that particular company had hired tons of nurses, and they were great at talking to hospitals,
Right.
right? And addressing very specific things that I wouldn't nearly be versed as they are, right? But they ran into a challenge where they only had one or two technical SEs for a dozen or 2 dozen nurses SEs. And so they would map out the whole thing, business solution, and the technical SE would come in and figure out, oh, that we could never implement this. Like
Right.
the systems don't support that kind of integration or those capabilities.
Right.
So they had an organizational issue there of not engaging or having enough technical SEs to engage at an early stage to
Right.
vet those solutions. We've had a very balanced approach, fortunately, of having both. One thing I've been surprised by is folks coming in at a junior level. So historically, people come into the SE role, most people don't know it exists. They stumble across it like I did. They're coming out of either oftentimes support, actually,
Hmm.
because they already have a deep technical knowledge, or CSM or services. So other client facing functions,
Right. I understand.
occasionally out of the,
Yeah.
yeah, occasionally out of the product team, maybe, but typically out of another client
Or
function
customer
because
facing. So yeah.
yeah, because you may come with some amount of technical expertise, storytelling, customer service, client-facing type things, even if you don't have it specifically in like a sales context
Right.
or understand the sales process or those particulars. At least you've got some of the other elements there.
Yeah.
And one thing that's really surprised me is people coming in at a junior level who have really excelled, right? Where they have the attitude and the aptitude to come in and learn things, right? And they just,
Figure it out.
apply themselves and take direction. They're easy to mentor, they learn and hardworking, and they figure it out. And so I've been pleasantly surprised by a number of junior folks that have come on our team that they've just applied themselves and figured it out,
Yeah.
even without the kind of experience that most SEs come in with.
And that's what holds a lot of people back. Most commonly, I see people that are potentially really good fit for sales engineering don't apply for sales engineering roles because, one, as you said, they don't even know what sales engineering is. So there's lack
Yeah.
of general awareness around what does the day-to-day look like? What do you do every day, every week? How are you measured? What does your career path look? And then the second one, which I think we're addressing in this conversation, is they feel like they've never been a sales engineer, they've never been part of sales. So when they submit that resume, they're going to get rejected because they've always been in services.
Mhm.
Now, some of us have fallen into that role because we were in the right spot at the right place where the company just said, I know you don't have any past SC experience or sales experience, but we need you in this role. And I
Yep.
think what we're trying to encourage through these formats is to empower people to say, you still got to apply. If you've got, and I think what you're coaching is, if you've got the context, if you've got the industry expertise, there's room for both industry and technical expertise. So
Right.
if you have one of those two, you're a great candidate. And if you've got intellectual curiosity and you like problem solving, you should apply. You should consider sales engineering as a profession.
Yeah, the trick is there's always a lot to learn. So if you're a very experienced hire, like if I move to another company, there's going to be tons for me to learn. Even if I go to another automation company doing healthcare, there's still
Yeah.
going to be a ton to learn. So when I look at folks that I've seen come into the company at even a junior level where they have very little professional experience of any kind, just a year out of college kind of thing, or somebody who's got 20 years in, I've seen maybe equal success rates, you
Yeah.
know, because they come in and even somebody senior just doesn't, maybe they're complacent, they're not learning as quickly or applying themselves. Whereas you've got somebody junior with like next to no expertise, they're ready, they pick stuff up and they don't have any bad habits. They're just whatever you need them to do, they'll do. So that's been super interesting. So there's so much to learn for anybody at any level of experience. And from a job market standpoint, it's not like there's tons of people that are close to what a company's looking for. If you've got the interest to do it, just go for it. Just
Yeah.
go ahead and apply and start. And I would say the more you can talk to people in the profession, the better. If you're currently at a company looking at the SE department, start
Yeah.
talking to
It's
AEs and
interesting.
SEs and volunteering to help with demos or answer technical questions by email. Just start volunteering to help them out, being helpful. I've seen people transition that way too. They just make themselves more and more available and interested, and they just naturally fall in when an opening comes up. I think that's the way to go.
That's a great recommendation. You may not have to switch your company, but
Yeah.
within your company, look for those SEs and be close to them. This is great advice. Jonathan, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate sharing your amazing journey. I love your unique perspective on operations. I think that's a really hot topic and very important topic that SCs and sales teams in general need to be thinking about. I love your lessons that we can learn from your journey around professional services and transitioning to sales engineering and having a great career. And most importantly, I've always admired and appreciated how much you've given back to the community, starting with the Austin meetup group and connecting people together. So thank you for helping the profession. Thank you for your time today. Really enjoyed talking to you, man.
Thank you. And I appreciate being here talking with you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jonathan. Take care.